Palpatine's plan to remain hidden until the very end of the war was indeed brilliant, but its execution was not without its flaws. Too often we give the Jedi a hard time for their blindness and their arrogance, but by the end of the Clone Wars, they were hot on the trail to finding Sidious and ending all of Palpatine's plans. Because while the Jedi were blinded by dogma, the Sith still stumbled over their own pride. Because of this, Sidious and Dooku made a few careless mistakes that almost cost them everything. In fact, had it not been for a single chair, the Jedi might not have known anything about the Sith for the entirety of the war. Some time ago we detailed how the Jedi believed that the figure known as Darth Sidious was a complete myth, but we hadn't gone into the nitty-gritty of how they found out that truth. So in today's video, we are diving into the Legends novel Labyrinth of Evil, which takes place just before the events of Revenge of the Sith. We'll find out how the Jedi took advantage of the Sith's mistakes to almost uncover the identity of this Darth Sidious. Welcome back to the archives, my friends, and let us begin. The novel begins with the final battle of Cato Nemoidia. Anakin, Obi-Wan, and the Republic forces have Viceroy Nute Gunray cornered, and they were besieging the city to take the Separatist leaders in once and for all. As they entered the main city complex, Gunray left in a hurry, attempting to take as many of his prized possessions as possible. It was a part of Nemoidian culture to accumulate a lot of well-made and rare possessions. Gunray himself had rooms upon rooms filled with what amounted now to expensive junk. He couldn't take it all, and so he attempted to load up everything that mattered to him in a short time, right before Anakin Skywalker found him. Because of how the battle had occurred, Anakin just narrowly missed Gunray before he was able to take off and depart the world. However, on the landing bay, it seemed that the Viceroy left behind one prized possession. A possession which could change the course of history forever: his Mechno Chair. For those of you that need a refresher, this was the same chair that he sat upon in The Phantom Menace, the one that carried him around on the mechanical spider legs. It was personally crafted for him and included a holoplate, and on that holoplate, he received personal transmissions from Darth Sidious. And worse, he had made a mistake. The Dark Lord did not consider that Nute Gunray would neglect to regularly wipe the data of the chair's holo recordings. All of their conversations, in fact, had been recorded, and he also didn't think that it was possible for this very important piece of furniture to fall into the hands of the Jedi Order. When Gunray realized what he had, and that he'd left his chair, he went into a panic, realizing that if Sidious didn't kill him first, that Grievous certainly would. He would attempt to have the chair remotely wipe of its own memory, but R2-D2 had managed to keep it from making its way to the main terminal. Once again, Anakin caught up, and he and R2 were able to stop it from wiping its data and disarmed its self-destruct mechanisms. That display only proved to the Jedi that whatever was on this chair was of distinct value. And when R2 hacked into its files, the Jedi got everything. For the first time, they saw the hooded and the robed figure on the data recording, and it was accompanied by Gunray addressing the figure as Lord Sidious. This officially ended all debate and rumors as to whether or not Sidious was indeed real. They now had irrefutable proof of it. The Jedi had believed that Dooku was lying when he revealed that a Sith Lord was controlling the Senate. Yoda had fought the Count to a stalemate in the docking bay, after which the Jedi Council refused to believe that any Darksider stronger than Dooku could exist. They were wrong, and because of this, they would imply that a Sith Lord that rivaled Grandmaster Yoda, and the fact that they had not sensed such a being, was impossible. Their arrogance would not allow them to believe such a thing was possible. Not to mention, Yoda says that they looked hard at the Senate, extensively questioning many senators in secret, and yet they found no evidence to suggest that they were reporting to any shadowy figure. Unfortunately, the Jedi were looking in the right place, but the wrong mindset. Yoda wondered if the Senate was indeed in the control of the Sith. Why hadn't the Republic already fallen? Why wasn't the Confederacy successful yet? He never thought of the extent of the Sith's true grand plan. And so the Jedi Council ruled that Sidious had been a myth. They discarded the very idea of a secret Sith based on their own power. But now that myth had completely collapsed. There was real tangible proof. This was a discovery so dire that Anakin and Obi-Wan put everything on pause, summoning Yoda directly to Cato Nemoidia. While the chair was being loaded and shipped to the Jedi Temple, Obi-Wan and Yoda would have a conversation with one another. In the book, we get much greater insight into the Jedi's perspectives on the entire situation. The novel reads this. The name Sidious had come up only once since the war began, when Dooku had told an imprisoned Obi-Wan that a Sith Lord by that name had hundreds of Republic senators under his influence. At that time, Obi-Wan assumed that Dooku was lying, doing so in order to persuade Obi-Wan that he was still aligned with the Jedi. although attempting to thwart the powers of the dark side by his own methods. And yet, even after Dooku had revealed himself to be Sith trained, Yoda and the other members of the Council continued to believe that he had been lying about this Sidious. 2 council members were convinced that Dooku was the Dark Lord, having somehow tutored himself, or by using a Sith holocron perhaps. Now that Sidious appeared to be real, Obi-Wan didn't know what to think. A hunt for Dooku's Sith allies had been going on almost since the war had begun. Dooku was known to have trained Jedi in the dark arts, but the question remained, who, if anyone, had been Dooku's teacher? 13 years earlier, when Obi-Wan had fought and killed a Sith on Naboo, he thought, had he killed a master or an apprentice? But the horned and the tattooed Sith whom Obi-Wan killed could not have trained Dooku, because Dooku had still been a member of the Jedi Order then. As clouded as the dark side made some things, there was simply no way that Dooku could have been living a double life within the walls of the temple itself. Dooku had revealed Sidious on Geonosis because he was hoping for Obi-Wan to join him in his quest, but he knew that if Obi-Wan did not join him, that he would think that Dooku was simply lying, as would the entire council. But what Dooku did not count on was the Jedi finding an alternative method of proving Sidious actually existed. The Dark Lord was usually thorough in scrubbing all mentions of himself from everywhere, though the oversight towards Gunray's Mechno Chair happened to be the one variable that slipped through all of the cracks in their web of lies. As Obi-Wan and Yoda talk, Yoda points something out. If Dooku had not revealed his allegiance to the Sith by dueling the Jedi, then the Order would have been on a wild bantha chase this entire time. It was Dooku's fault that they knew he was aligned with the Sith, and were gunning for him, which led to discovering the truth of Sidious. If he had stayed silent and escaped, the Jedi would have wasted time looking for Maul's Sith accomplice, whether that was master or apprentice, and while Dooku could have escalated the war from the shadows, he ultimately revealed his hand. Obi-Wan agreed, and mentioned how he thought of that day over and over again. When he was fleeing for his ship, it was almost as if he was allowing himself to be seen, almost as if he was attempting to draw Anakin and Obi-Wan into a duel. The Jedi concluded that Dooku couldn't help but reveal himself, even though he may have regretted it later. Obi-Wan initially thought Dooku was attempting to buy time for the Separatist leaders to escape, but his instincts told him that the Count desperately wanted to demonstrate just how powerful he had become. He left Anakin and Obi-Wan alive to send a message to the Jedi, but he was genuinely surprised when Yoda arrived. Yoda concurs with this statement, and speaks to how Dooku's pride had now undone him. He needed the Jedi. He needed Yoda to witness his powers. While he didn't anticipate fighting his old master here, he was still pleased with the outcome. But by showing his true face so early, it revealed the Sith's hand in the war. And so the novel goes on. Anakin and Obi-Wan would do some detective work to track down the chair's manufacturer, and to trace Darth Sidious all the way back to Coruscant. Windu and the Jedi Council would even find secret tunnels beneath Palpatine's apartment building, coming to realize that Sidious had something to do with the Supreme Chancellor. Unfortunately for them, that is when the Battle of Coruscant would strike, right as they were about to make a breakthrough in the case. But that is how close the Jedi came to ending all of the Sith's machinations, to destroying all of the rule of 2, just because of Dooku's pride and a singular chair. Honestly, Gunray had always been a liability to Sidious, but this time it was his own mistakes in not covering his bases that almost led to all of it getting foiled. Obi-Wan and Yoda's assessment of Dooku and his pride is also really interesting and fascinating here. The idea that he could have operated from the shadows and that would have been much more advantageous for a lot longer, and yet, his pride forced him to reveal himself, wanting to revel in his newfound power. We get to see more of that part of Yoda's character in Yoda Dark Rendezvous, which explores why he and Dooku's relationship is so interesting. It shows that despite how powerful and evil and corrupted Dooku becomes, that Yoda still understands his old student. It also reveals that Dooku's thoughts were never in allegiance with Sidious. In the back of his mind, he was constantly trying to prove something to the old Jedi. That of course makes me wonder if Sidious picked up on all of this, which would explain why Palpatine reacted so strongly to Darth Vader attempting to taunt down Obi-Wan, and why he wanted Vader to forget Kenobi entirely, to let go, instead of indulging in that desire for revenge as Dooku had. But perhaps that's an analysis for another day. But tell us your thoughts down below, my friends, and as always, may the Force be with you and have an excellent day.